Welcome to the Grad School Femme Touring Podcast. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez Vu, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with tips and tricks and everything else you need to know to get into graduate school. For the past 10 years, I've been helping undergraduate students get into top graduate programs in their field, and I'm really excited to share this information with you too. All right, we are ready to get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited. We have another guest speaker. And today our speaker is going to be talking to us all about navigating burnout during your journey to a PhD, an immigrant's perspective with Dr. Gina Vanegas. So I'll get started with reading Dr. Gina's bio. Dr. Gina Vanegas, who uses pronouns she, her, is a Latinx bilingual psychology postdoctoral fellow and qualitative researcher and experienced speaker. She immigrated from Colombia at 16 years old and became the first person in her family to receive a PhD. She is passionate about contributing to the self-empowerment of underrepresented communities by sharing her training in the area of social justice and psychology, and by engaging in advocacy efforts to deconstruct systemic barriers. Welcome to the podcast, Gina, or Dr. Gina.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to chat a little bit more about this topic and to have an opportunity to also tell my story. So I appreciate you creating this space.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you on, especially because you're someone I know, you're someone that I, greatly respect. For the listeners, they don't know our relationship. We worked together with, in the UCSB McNair program. And I recall just how comfortable the students were with you, how much they reached out to you, just what an amazing resource and support, you were to them. So I think that will only kind of continue to kind of spread it through the listeners and anybody else who you come into contact. So I'm excited for you to share a little bit more about yourself, about your background and your journey to the PhD. So feel free to share whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that lovely intro. And yes, I was so appreciative of being able to work with you too through the McNair office. It was just such a lovely experience. And I'll talk a little bit about the role that McNair had in my life, because it really was such a helpful resource for me in so many different ways. But I guess to start, so I came to the US when I was 16 years old, and everybody's immigration story is unique. What is unique about mine is that I came because I wanted to come. I actually convinced my parents and begged them to come to the US because my dream was to graduate from a university in the US. And so that's a little unique.
I had no idea, actually. That's so interesting. Okay, I'll let you keep going.
No, and I think that shaped a lot about the way we kind of got introduced to the US and American culture. I did speak some English before coming to the US. There were a lot of things that I still needed to work on, grammar-wise, pronunciation-wise. To this day, I still get called on my accent. There's so many factors that I was still kind of learning. And when we immigrated to Atlanta, Georgia, which we actually immigrated to a small suburb of Atlanta. And that also kind of shaped my experience or my first years in the US. So this lovely dream that I had in my mind, in reality, was nothing like what I was expecting. And it quickly dissipated within 6 months. And I say that because sometimes the geographical areas that we kind of immigrate to, or kind of what you've shared before, like the programs that you choose, have such an impact on your experience. And so that certainly was the case for me. I knew I wanted to be a psychologist in my teens, and I didn't know how long it was going to take, and it's taking a long time. I'm still in that process. And so it's just, it's a wonderful field, but it definitely has had a lot of work and a lot of tears and a lot of just persistence. And so um, I think it's important to kind of consider as immigrant and as first gens, the idea of energy. How do we create energy? How do we keep energy? How do we not waste energy? How do we maintain our energy? And because I immigrated at 16 years old, I did my last 2 years of high school and in the US. And so there was a
Oh,
really
wow.
steep learning curve of like, I didn't even know what the SATs were.
So
Um,
what did you expect? Because I know you said earlier that, what you dreamt was very different from the actual reality. So you arrived to the US and you are a teenager in high school. You got to finish up high school. What did you think school would be like versus what it actually was like?
I had the privilege of studying in a school in Colombia that kind of supposedly mimic the system here. That was not true. That was very different. And
Yeah.
I think I was in awe in the beginning of like just, oh, I'm hearing English all around me and being immersed in this other um, arena and this other world that I'd never known. And I consumed a lot of media that was in English when I was in Colombia. So I guess I assumed that it would be some sort of version of like, I don't know, one of the shows that I had seen. I have no idea
Uh-huh.
what I expected.
And it seems like I just can't imagine being that age and then navigating a new culture, a new language, a new school system, and then still figuring out a way to go to college after that. So I can imagine that then like that like that feeling of it being completely different continuing on in college too. So can you tell us a little bit about what college was like too for you?
Exactly. Just feeling, I think because of that steep learning curve, I didn't get into a 4 year school. I got into a 2 year school. And there was a lot of shame about that. Like people I knew were going into this like amazing schools. And I think that feeling has stayed on throughout my journey of like, oh, I'm not doing enough. I am not, I need to be on more extracurriculars. I need to talk to more people. I need to network. Is the constant catching up that kind of has stayed along the education journey. So yeah, it was, learning how to write an admissions essay while learning English, how to write properly in English, while also learning, that I look different and people pointing that out very quickly and learning that I had an accent and learning that I, stood out to people in different ways. And some people were okay with that. Some people were not okay with that. And so I think, that has been true throughout my journey. Xenophobia has definitely been a part of it. And yeah, I mentioned that because sometimes we don't realize, as I think as first gens, that our starting point is different than other people who might have generations of people going to the same school, who have many like engineers in their families or things like that. That was not my experience. So I didn't really have anyone to that I can turn to who could understand what that experience was like. And I know like other people have talked about this in your podcast, and that is still true very much as an immigrant, with the added of like the microaggressions about being an immigrant or being picked, around that. Um, and so I think for me, it was just this constant battling of like, okay, how do I get into a 4 year school? And then once you get into the 4 year school, well, how do I get into grad school? And now what do I need to do? I mean, I remember, working 30 hours a week, and then going on a Friday afternoon because my school was like an hour away from where I live. So I had to drive in the middle of Atlanta traffic, which for people who know Atlanta, traffic can be bad, not as bad as LA, but bad. Friday afternoon to go volunteer at a lab in hopes that somebody would give me a recommendation letter. And that takes a lot of work. And I don't think that we realize how much work on top of figuring out what are the requirements, like the emotional labor that it takes to get to the next level is really what, you know, eventually led to my burnout in getting to grad school. I had applied because again, the steep learning curve, you're learning so many things at so many times and in different ways. And so you're trying to put it all together to fit in this nice package in an admissions letter. And how do I say all of this in a way that people can understand it, relate, and want to give me a scholarship or whatever it is that I'm trying to do? And so I actually applied. So I was still very interested in psychology, and I applied to a bunch of PhD programs without knowing much of what that was like or what did I need to do or whatnot. I somehow got into McNair, and that for me was like life changing. Like, I was not very good about networking. I didn't know how to, but I was really good at finding resources. Like, that was my lifeline. Like, I found organizations to help me because I knew that that was their job. So it's like, you have to help me. And McNair was certainly the case for me. And, my McNair advisor, not my advisor, but the program director wasn't very supportive. And in fact, kind of told me a friend that I was kind of wasting my time. And
Wait, the McNair director, it's interesting because I did a very similar program, the Mellon Mays program, and I had a director who was also not very supportive. And oof, I don't even want to get into it because I don't want to start drama, but it was, I mean, he really did not do what he was supposed to do and did not help us out or encourage us, or, it's just, I continue to be surprised that some folks, not a lot, but some folks who hold these titles and positions that are supposed to be supporting and helping, the next generation, and then they don't, or they're the opposite. They're discouraging. So I'm sorry. I just jumped in, but I think I recall you mentioning that before, and it continues to surprise me as if you're telling me for the first time right now.
Well, and like you've been in that position too. Like, you can't even fathom doing that to somebody else, right? And so I think that has like driven my passion of like, I need to be a mentor for other people because I didn't get that. And so I think that just kind of drives another area for me. And that's why I was saying McNair had a big impact. That person, I don't know what was going on in their life. And to this day, I don't know where that was coming from. But at the same time, it's like, that was not the deal breaker. McNair continued to help me even through my grad school program. It paid for my tuition. It helped me in so many different ways. And it became kind of my community without even realizing it. So I think, I'm so grateful for that program for that reason. But, it doesn't have to be McNair. It could be, like you said, the Mellon Mays. It could be so many other organizations that are out there. And it's a matter of sometimes of just like really trying to find it that could be really helpful so that you're not just fighting through this race that you were not prepared for, that was not meant for you, that you have no tools for on your own, because it can be so exhausting. And I think because I had been fighting my way through to get to grad school, because I did apply to like 20 programs and I didn't get into any. I got into one master's degree and I was like, okay, disappointed. And again, the feelings of shame, like, oh, I'm not good enough, the self-worth, the doubt. And that was probably what was best for me at the time, because it allowed me to get connected to faculty who then actually became my recommendation letters for the next time I tried. And that presented a better case the second time around. So I took 3 years after my master's and was a school counselor for a little bit. That was really fun. I really liked that job. And then I applied again to grad schools, and I got into UCSB, and I just could not believe it. Like, somebody must have had a mistake. They must have not.
Can I just pause for a minute? Let's pause on that, because that happened to me, and I hear that same, what is it called? That same voice in your head, on like levels, that same kind of like negative thought that comes up for a lot of us who are either first gen or immigrant students of someone made a mistake, of I do not deserve this, of I am not good enough. And I just want to like put a pause on that, because I feel like this is something where, again, it's going to resonate for a lot of the listeners, is one, feeling like, well, if I apply, I'm not going to get in. And then if I don't get in, then that's going to
Right.
validate my feelings of like not feeling good enough. And then if I try again and I get in, it's a mistake. So yeah, sorry, I just
Oh, I think
that's
that's so
a,
true.
yeah.
And I hear it so much, and now people refer to it as like imposter syndrome. And yes, we all feel that imposter syndrome at different times in our lives, but I think that hits you so differently when you're a person of color, because you haven't had people to vouch for you. We haven't had sponsors, we haven't had mentors, we haven't had people to guide us, right? So I think a rejection or a no hits a little different when you haven't had that validation that you really need at this point.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add to what you said about it, sometimes, we associate it with imposter syndrome, is that I think it's more than just imposter syndrome, because it's you're constantly being made to feel like you are not
Yeah.
good enough. So it's not that you feel like you're a fraud and you're not good enough, but you constantly, all the microaggressions, the setting in and of itself makes you feel like you don't belong, and that contributes to your feeling of of not fitting in, not being good enough. And that, even going back to what you said earlier about that feeling of you're constantly playing catch up because people have generations of resources, which then ties back to why so many of us are so resourceful. And that's the
Yeah.
strength, and always reminding yourself, like during that thought, the negative kind of loop in your head of I'm not good enough, is reminding yourself, actually I am, actually it's the strength, actually I'm resourceful, actually I'm resilient. And that hopefully helping you to move to the next step. So
Totally.
not sure what you're gonna say next.
No, I appreciate that, because I think that kind of putting things into perspective too, of like, it's not me, it's the system. The system is making me feel this way. But that's not necessarily an accurate picture, right? Like if
And
we,
it's hard, because when you're constantly being made to feel that way, it's almost like I mentioned in a previous podcast episode, it's like gaslighting. It's like,
yes.
wait, am I the only one feeling this way? Like, am I the only one hearing this, what this person said that's offensive,
Oh my
or
God.
this person telling me that I should quit, or whatever the negative, messages that you're getting. Yeah.
So true. And I think we also think, okay, so what's the next thing that I need to get done, right? Like what comes next? What comes next? And then you think when you get to the next step, it's going to be better. And I think, I don't know, for some reason that reminds me of like the feeling of like, oh, when I get to the US and I get to study, like it's this dream. But then when you get there and it's not like that, that's heartbreaking. Like that's really, kind of has like that grief piece to it of like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. I had an advisor who I had hoped to be my champion, who I had hoped to be my mentor, my guide, and that could not be farther from the truth. And so a lot of my time in grad school became, how do I strategize around this person? How do I overcome this yet another obstacle? And that comes at a toll, like that amount of emotional labor, like you said, convincing myself constantly, like, no, I do belong here, no, I am good enough. That constant belonging, that takes a toll on your body, that takes a toll on your mental health. And that certainly was the case for me in my third year of grad school. I had my mental health really, really tanked. And I just, I didn't know how else I could go forward. I really didn't know. I knew I wanted to go forward. I knew I didn't want to drop out. I knew that I just want to get to the other side, but I really had like no energy in me left to keep fighting. And
Can I ask you though? I'm sorry to interrupt. Like, at what point did you realize that you were burnt out? Because you said it happened in your third year, but I'm sure there was build up to that. So I'm wondering, like, at what point did you start getting burned out? At what point did you realize it? And then, yeah, what helped you kind of like navigate that? Because clearly you finished. You're a doctora now. Yay.
finally,
Yeah.
yes, I think that's such a good question, because sometimes when you're burnt out, you don't recognize it, right? and nobody's really going to tell you, hey, I think you're burned out. Like, I think that's not the rule, right? So what was what I remember of that, like okay, this is not normal, was I was just trying to be everything for everyone. And, at the time, because I'm in psychology, we carry clinical caseload. So I had clients that I was carrying as well, while teaching, while mentoring, while also attending classes, while trying to, you know, graduate. And what really kind of resonated with me is like, I had no energy for anything. Like, everything seemed like a struggle. Like, brushing my teeth was a struggle. So sometimes that, again, that idea of energy is like, if you're noticing that you have the little things, the little tasks are becoming such a burden, um, I think that is a really big sign. And the other part of it too is the apathy is for me, wasn't as much as apathy, but I know that that's one of the ways that it can feel. It was more like, nothing will ever get better. Nothing will ever get better for me. Nothing will ever get better for the people that I'm helping. No matter what I do, the system is always going to crash me, right? And so I think those two things were kind of like, okay, I think this, I should not, I should be showering. Like, that should be a thing, right? Like, this isn't normal. And so I ended up seeking out, obviously, therapy. And I still remember my therapist at the time, who was fantastic. She was like, I think you need a break. And I looked at her like she was crazy. Like, I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. Why would I need a break? Like, how can I be taking a break if I'm trying to graduate? And she really helped me kind of learn that that was okay. And I think it took that conversation of like, you can rest, you're entitled to rest, you have the right for that, you have the right to rest.
Can
That
you
really,
say that again over and
right,
over and over again?
you have the right to rest. And you know what, the way I
Yeah.
think about it is, my gosh, my ancestors, my grandparents,
Mm.
my parents, they have fought tooth and nail for me to get to this point. And it is not for nothing. If anything, they have given me the privilege to, at this point, be able to say when I need to rest. And I do it sometimes for thinking about them, like, that's how I have permission to rest. And that was really helpful. I think from there, I learned more of like, oh, okay, so, I don't have to go 1,000 miles an hour. I can decide what rest looks like for me too, because I think sometimes people think like, I go on vacation for 2 weeks a year and that's enough. And like, no, it's not enough. So yeah, so determining too what rest looks like for you, what is helpful was good.
I feel like what you just said was so powerful about needing someone else to tell you that you're allowed to take a break, that you're allowed to rest. That is huge, because especially in like the culture of academia, taking a break, taking a leave, resting is not encouraged, whether it's resting by setting firm hours on when you're working, or resting by taking a vacation. It's like, what? How dare you take a vacation when you are a student or an academic of any form? And I hear that time and time again, not just among undergrads who are doing research. They're like, no, I can't take time off because my faculty mentor won't let me. I need to do X number of lab hours. To then grad school, no, I can't take time off. I'm sure you felt this way too, because I have this milestone and this thing, all these like ¿cómo se llaman? Like hurdles that you're constantly having to meet. And if you don't do it, then there will be some sort of repercussion, negative repercussion. And then people get to their careers and they're putting their life on hold. They're like, no, I can't take a break from going on the job market, because then I'm not going to be as competitive and I'm not going to get that job and whatever. This like what if idea of like, if I don't keep going, I'm going to lose out on these opportunities. And then people put their life on hold. They say, I'm not going to have kids, or I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to travel. And I'm here for like telling everybody and their mama that it's okay to take a break, and that it
Yeah.
can not only, instead of hurting you, it can actually help you. You can come back stronger. So sorry, I had to go on a rant yet again, but everything you're saying, I feel like I just want to keep like echoing it and putting it out there. And I think that message is coming out. I'm hearing it more and more now, which is great. More people are trying to make napping a thing. I still can't nap. I try, but I can't.
I'm the greatest napper that you
Oh, I wish
will
I could. I try and I can't. So it's wild how deep that, like, deeply ingrained, that feeling of constantly having to be on and
Yeah.
productive and do work, and how hard it is to unlearn that.
Mhm.
So yeah, going back to this topic of burnout, you were in your third year. You kind of, I had a question earlier when you were describing burnout and how it manifested in you. How then did you distinguish it from other forms of mental health issues? Or because I know for some people, like for instance, for myself, I did struggle and navigated through severe postpartum depression when I was a graduate student, because I had my son in grad school, and it was hard for me when I was depressed. I struggled to brush my teeth too, and I had days where I felt like, kind of what you said, nothing will ever get better. Like, why am I doing this? There's no purpose in me doing what I do. Um, and so, because for me, those feelings were more associated with depression rather than burnout, how do you distinguish between the two? You know?
I think that's such a good question. And I'm trying to like think about how do I want to answer this in a way that's like thoughtful. I think a psychologist, not that I am one yet, but
And training, soon to
and
be.
turning to being PhD, yes, hopefully next 4 months. But in the DSM, which is what we use to look at different diagnostics, burnout is not a diagnosis.
Oh,
Depression, anxiety,
interesting.
adjustment disorder,
Uh-huh.
that is a diagnosis that would be under. For
Mm-hmm.
me, how it presented is that was depression, that was a depressive episode. And it was
Oh.
included with anxiety as well. And so I think at the end of the day, it's like the way I think about it is this: is it burnout? Is it depression? I don't really know, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I know that something has to give. I know that I can't keep going in the way that I'm going because clearly it's taking a toll on my mental health and my physical health, because
Yeah.
once your mental health tanks, your physical health also goes along. It's kind of like they both go hand in hand. So I would think about it from that perspective, of I need that's just a signal that you need more support at that point.
And I think that's really helpful that you said burnout is not in the DSM. So burnout in and of itself can manifest in different ways, and the ways that it manifests could also be part of, maybe you're struggling with depression or anxiety or some
Mhm.
other thing. But I wanted to also ask you, one is, what do you do now to make sure that you don't get burnt out, or to try to, if you start to feel like it's coming on, to try to just nip it, like to
My God,
prevent it? And
please feel
also, what do you wish you would have known in grad school that you could have done, um, when you were struggling?
I think it feels like a full-time job at times, honestly. It really does. And I'm getting better at catching it before it happens. So I think one is like if you recognize the signs, I think that's a little bit easier. Again, like the idea of energy for me was really what stood out, if of like, oh, well, like, yeah, I haven't been showering, I'm not brushing my teeth, like that's not normal, right? So trying to catch it before it's like the ideal. So that's one. Two, it's how do you do self-care? And I know it's like such a cliche word at this point, but how do you care for yourself on a daily basis? Like, I don't want you waiting for your 2 weeks or for your 1 week vacation out of the year. Like, what are you doing on a daily basis to disconnect and from whatever stressor that you're facing? And then the other part that I was wanting to mention too is like having hobbies or having activities that build your confidence, that restore your faith in humanity. Because I think that was another thing. I had to cut down on news. I had to really look at what kind of media I was consuming, trying to look at pictures of puppies or uplifting things, because they really kind of balance that worldview. And like that's what happens after, you have a period of like stress is good to a certain extent when it comes to a point where it's like too much, and you're in that state for prolonged periods of time. That's what leads to burnout, which if you stay in that way, that could actually lead to trauma. So it is really important that you are trying to develop, kind of strategies that you have for yourself that are going to be on a daily basis to prevent it from happening. And then as soon as you notice that, making sure that you're seeking mental health if that's what you need, or even just, I think the other piece that is not often talked about is community, like creating community. Who is in your community that can lend you support? And for me, that has largely been my family. And I just want to mention this, like the more education that I got as I was moving forward in my education, I noticed there was a gap that was creating between my parents and me, because they didn't understand my career, they didn't understand what I was doing. And so how could you call home and say that you're not feeling well if your parents don't even understand it, right? And so the best piece of advice that I received was bring them along, share everything you're learning, call them, tell them what your day was like, explain about Professor X, tell them your classmates names, because then if it does happen, you can call them and they'll have context and they'll be better able to support you. So those are like things that I do that have been helpful for me in like navigating burnout.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So I feel like if anybody's listening and is a current undergrad or grad student struggling with burnout, you just named a bunch of really, really helpful things, from trying to catch it on before to developing kind of a daily practice or ritual of like taking care of yourself, to building community. And if it's family, because for a lot of us, especially immigrant students or children of immigrants, family can be a big thing for us, a big support system for us. And I love that you said bring them along. I don't even think I intentionally realized that I was doing it in grad school with my mom, but I would have conversations with her, especially about people. And I
That's
remember my first
good.
advisor was so toxic, and I'd be like, esta señora, esto y esto y otro, like this person, this lady would do this and this and this. And
Yeah.
she was so mean to me. And then my mom would be like, mija, le voy a prender una veladora. Like, I'm going to light her a candle. And oh my gosh, I do think that they
Yes,
help.
it does. It does, because then you're not
Yeah.
alone. And I think that that's
Yeah.
part of the burnout is you feel
Hmm.
alone in this like misery. And if you have connections to like other positive aspects, then it's a lot harder for you to get to that like really low place. So I love that you did that
Yeah.
with your mom. That's amazing. I used to have like cafecito with my mom, and like would try like my I did a qualitative dissertation. I would try the
Hmm.
protocol with her to see if it would work, and she would like ask
Oh,
questions, and they loved it and I loved it, and it helped us connect better too. So
yeah. I
yeah.
love that too for you. I think this is a great way to kind of start to wrap up the podcast episode. I just want to ask you one, well, technically two more questions. So the second to last question is there anything else that you feel that you want to share about the topic of burnout, or any last kind of final thoughts around the topic?
Mm, no, just again, making sure that you're building confidence outside of your work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the other thing I didn't say is you mentioned the hobbies. You mentioned getting involved in things that restore your faith in humanity. Oh, that's huge, not just for grad school, but like for life.
Like, true.
So I love that. And then the next question, the last question is, if folks resonate with what you shared and want to follow you, reach out, be in touch, connect in some way, how can others reach you?
So I am on social media at Dr. Gina Vanegas, and that is Dr. Drginavanegas. Because it's usually misspelled because other people from other countries spell it like Venegas, but it's Vanegas.
Vanegas. Yeah. And which social media are you on? Because you mentioned social media. I'm assuming IG because I have you on IG, but is there any other
I am on TikTok. I am sharing more videos. So if you want to learn more about what strategies I use to get to this point, that's kind of what I'm doing with TikTok. So right now mainly Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok.
Okay, I will make sure that I link this on the show notes so that way they have your different social media accounts. Thank you so much, Dr. Gina. I loved catching up, hearing more about your. Some parts I was like, I had no idea.
You never
So
know.
it's really nice.
Yeah, thank you so much for creating the space. It's so needed. I'm so happy that there's other people who are learning from all of us who have already been through this journey. So thank you for creating it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me in the Grad School Femtoring podcast. If you liked what you heard, please rate this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere you tune in. You can also support the podcast by donating to my Patreon page, Anchor page, or Venmo account, which is at Grad School Femtoring. If you have questions or episode topics, you can contact me by sending me a DM on Instagram, sending me an email to gradschoolfemtoring@gmail.com, sending me a voice message on Anchor, or sending me a message via my personal website at YvetteMartinezvu.com. Until next time.